discovered that the bones had bite marks and other evidence that they had been eaten or gnawed on by a predator. But also, alongside these bones were the remains of the culprit, an ancient hyena. During the Ice Age, the cave was a hyena den, and the various animals had been carrying his dedication. Buckland actually acquired a live hyena from a travelling zoo and fed it part of a cow. Once the hyena had digested its food, its feces perfectly matched the fossilized ones found in Kirkdale Cave, and even contained small bone fragments as well. Saudi Arabia, named Jasan Cave, has a truly enormous accumulation of bones left there by many generations of striped hyena dragging in the food over the course of 7,000 years. Among the remains were rhinos, which are now extinct in Saudi Arabia, wild horses, and aurochs, which are the animals that cows were domesticated from, and even some humans. In the early 1800s, miners uncovered a cave entrance in a limestone quarry in the north of England, named Kirkdale Cave, and one section was filled with the bones of long-dead animals. They were initially thought to be the bones of cattle, however, under scrutiny, they turned out to be much larger animals not found in the UK, like rhinos, hippos, and elephants. At the time, the widely held belief among the locals and even some naturalists to explain why a collection of African animals were found in a cave in England was that they had been washed up during the biblical flood. It was later discovered that the bones had bite marks and other evidence that they had been eaten or gnawed on by a predator. But also, alongside these bones were the remains of the culprit, an ancient hyena. During the Ice Age, the cave was a hyena den, and the various animals had been carried into the cave by hyenas. There are dozens of caves like this known throughout Europe and Asia, from France to Thailand. However, these hyenas weren't exactly the same creatures as the spotted hyenas found in Africa, as they were much larger and clearly behaved in a different way, as spotted hyenas don't commonly make their home in caves. The pivotal work resolving the mystery of the bones found in the cave was done by a geologist named William Buckland. Buckland noticed that among the bite marks and damage to the bones, the cave also contained hard, chalky lumps that a colleague pointed out to him looked like the feces of a hyena. As hyenas are uniquely capable of crushing and digesting bone, their excrement is filled with large amounts of calcium, colouring it white and making it highly identifiable. Showing his dedication, Buckland actually acquired a live hyena from a travelling zoo and fed it part of a cow. Once the hyena had digested its food, its feces perfectly matched the fossilized ones found in Kirkdale Cave, and even contained small bone fragments as well. This meant the hyenas couldn't have been swept in from another continent and must have been actively living in England when they died. Today, this reasoning seems very straightforward, but for the time, making inductions about past events through experiments like this was pioneering. The earliest cave hyena bones in Europe are dated to around 300,000 years ago, when Europe's midsection was painted with a cold, dry grassland that stretched all the way to Canada, known as the steppe tundra. During the Ice Age glacial periods, the colder temperatures locked up large amounts of water in vast ice sheets, creating a drier and dustier climate across the globe. So there were far less trees in the northern hemisphere and more open grassland. The steppe tundra was one of the largest biomes that has ever existed, and had a similar amount of diversity to the African savanna, being able to support a gargantuan ecosystem of animals. Across the steppe tundra, hyenas were abundant, easily being one of the most common predators, and had an incredibly diverse diet with all manner of animal remains discovered in their dens. The most common prey eaten were wild horses, red deer, reindeer, wild boar, and bison. However, mammoth and woolly rhino remains have also been discovered in hyena caves. A cave in the Czech Republic and another in Germany contain the remains of cave hyena skeletons that clearly have gnaw marks on them left by other hyenas, showing they must have engaged in cannibalism at times. There is also substantial archaeological evidence that shows cave hyenas ate Neanderthals, including Guattari Cave in Italy that has the fossilized remains of 9 Neanderthals with puncture wounds most likely made by these large predators. One of the most complete skeletons of a cave hyena known was discovered in northern Spain, and it is estimated to have weighed over 100 kilograms while alive. The largest spotted hyenas ever recorded cap out at around 90 kilos, so for one of just a handful of skeletons known to already contain an individual surpassing that, shows that cave hyenas were significantly larger than spotted hyenas. Study of many of their bones, including bone fragments, compared with spotted hyenas, show that on average a cave hyena was likely around 60% larger, and there were other differences too. Cave paintings show they most likely had smaller ears and tails, and certain bones like their arms and legs were more robust, being thicker but shorter, and their upper arm bones were slightly curved. Despite all these differences, spotted hyenas are still much more similar to cave hyenas in skeletal structure than they are to the other 3 species of the hyena family alive today. Due to having shorter and more robust limbs, it has been suggested they may have been slightly slower than spotted hyenas and relied more on scavenging. Modern spotted hyenas are fast and highly effective hunters, killing the vast majority of their prey and only occasionally scavenging. However, other living hyenas like the brown and striped hyena are the opposite and largely scavenge. Striped hyenas hunt less than half their food, and brown hyenas very rarely hunt at all. The behaviours of these 2 creatures seem to mirror cave hyenas better than spotted hyenas in other ways too. Both seek out dens in disused burrows, caves, and abandoned human structures, where there is a mass accumulation of bones from the animal carcasses they have killed or scavenged. An ancient lava tube in Saudi Arabia, named Jasan Cave, has a truly enormous accumulation of bones left there by many generations of striped hyena dragging in the food over the course of 7,000 years. Among the remains were rhinos, which are now extinct in Saudi Arabia, wild horses, and aurochs, which are the animals that cows were domesticated from, and even some human remains. Spotted hyenas do use dens, but they are usually temporary and are not known to contain large quantities of bones. Spotted hyenas live in large socially complex clans, but striped hyenas are largely solitary, and there is reason to believe that cave hyenas may have been more like this also. Casts from the skulls of cave hyenas have shown that their forebrain was slightly smaller than modern spotted hyenas, which is the part of the brain that controls more advanced functions like social behaviour. It is likely that spotted hyenas had more scavenging-oriented and less social ancestors, and adapted to become more cooperative and active hunters, and cave hyenas may have remained more like them.
At this point, the picture sharpens in a surprising way. Cave hyenas weren't just oversized versions of what we see today. They may have been holding onto an older way of life. Less social, more solitary, more dependent on scavenging, yet powerful enough to dominate entire ecosystems. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't always move forward in a straight line. Some species specialize, others retain ancestral traits that still work in the right environment. And here, that strategy clearly paid off. But it also raises a deeper question. If cave hyenas were so adaptable, so widespread, and so successful, what kind of change could actually push an animal like this to extinction?
Their ancestors. Having ancestors that scavenged more would explain why they are such highly effective bone crushers, allowing them to consume much more of the carcass. Due to their similarities, it isn't completely resolved if they were just a larger subspecies of hyena or a completely separate species. A genetic study in 2020 of the mitochondria in the cells of cave hyenas and spotted hyenas found no clear separation. However, study of their genome showed that they were likely a separate species. Mitochondria are not related to the host cell and are actually related to ancient free-living bacteria that has formed a symbiotic relationship within your cells and those of all animals. This makes them very useful for genetic studies because they have their own unique DNA and they reproduce asexually, which means there is very little genetic variation between generations, making studies easier to conduct. The disagreement of the 2 types of study could be because the spotted hyenas and cave hyenas still had a gene flow. In other words, they were separate species, but carried on breeding with each other after the separation. This would make sense because cave hyena bones are common in the Middle East, and although spotted hyenas are primarily known from sub-Saharan Africa today, they used to be common in North Africa up until around 5,000 years ago. Cave hyenas were common, but were slightly less common in the far north of Europe that was still inhabited by other large predators of the time, like cave lions, so this may have been the limit of their adaptability to cold weather. However, they were very common in England, which is known to have been significantly colder during the last glacial period, even for the time, with winter temperatures dropping below -20 degrees Celsius easily. However, what's amazing is cave hyenas have also been found as far south as Thailand and Cambodia, living in a drastically different climate and ecosystem, coexisting with tigers and Asiatic black bears. Like anywhere else in the world at this time, Southeast Asia was drier and colder than today, but it wasn't cold. The climate was still hot, but less tropical and more seasonal with more grasslands. Asian cave hyenas are also older. Whereas the oldest cave hyena fossils in Europe are around 300,000 years old, there are remains in China dating to 2 million years ago. Cave hyenas went extinct around 11,000 years ago. However, populations had already been declining before this. As the last glacial period was coming to an end around 15,000 years ago, the climate started to become warmer and wetter, which caused the steppe tundra to decrease in size, and woodlands and shrublands became more common. This caused a decline of many Ice Age mammals that would have reduced the amount of food available for cave hyenas. There is also plenty of evidence of human-wildlife conflict and competition with cave hyenas that would presumably become more intense as prey became less available, eventually driving cave hyenas to extinction. Thank you for watching. A big thank you goes to all my patrons, especially the big contributors that are listed here. If you like content like this, then consider becoming a patron as well.
What makes cave hyenas so fascinating isn't just their size or even their strength. It's the world they reveal. A world that feels almost unrecognizable compared to today. Imagine standing in Ice Age Europe, not in forests, but in vast, open grasslands stretching for thousands of miles. Herds of horses, bison, and mammoths moving across the landscape. And somewhere in the distance, a hyena, larger, heavier, and built differently than any living species today, dragging bones back to a cave that will slowly become a time capsule of its existence. Those caves are more than just dens. They are records of behavior. Every tooth mark, every broken bone, every fragment of calcium-rich waste tells us something about how these animals lived. They weren't delicate predators. They consumed nearly everything, flesh, bone, and all, leaving behind a chemical and physical signature that could survive for hundreds of thousands of years. That ability alone made them incredibly efficient. In a harsh and competitive Ice Age environment, wasting nothing could mean the difference between survival and extinction. But what's truly striking is how cave hyenas blur the lines we try to draw in nature. Were they a separate species, or just a variation of spotted hyenas? The evidence doesn't give a simple answer. Genetics signals conflict. There are hints of separation, but also signs of continued interbreeding. It suggests a reality that is far messier than our categories. Evolution isn't clean. Species don't always split and stay apart. Sometimes they diverge and then reconnect, and their range pushes that idea even further. From freezing conditions in northern Europe to much warmer, seasonal environments in Southeast Asia, cave hyenas existed across an enormous range of climates. That tells us something critical. They weren't narrowly adapted specialists. They were flexible, opportunistic, capable of surviving in very different ecosystems as long as the fundamentals, food, shelter, opportunity, were present. So when we ask why they disappeared, the answer isn't simple weakness. It's convergence. Multiple pressures building at once. As the Ice Age ended, the massive steppe tundra shrank. The open landscapes that supported huge herds began to fragment into forests and shrublands. Prey species declined or shifted, and at the same time, humans were spreading, competing for the same animals, the same space, and in some cases, directly confronting these predators. Even a highly adaptable animal has limits. And when the environment changes fast enough, when food disappears, competition increases, and habitats transform, those limits are eventually reached. Cave hyenas didn't just vanish. They were edged out of a world that no longer existed. And that's the deeper takeaway here. The ecosystems we see today are not permanent. They are just the latest version in a long sequence of shifting worlds. Animals rise, adapt, dominate, and then, sometimes, disappear when the rules change. The bones in those caves are reminders of that constant change. Silent evidence of a predator that once thrived across continents, shaping ecosystems in ways we're only beginning to understand. If this made you see the Ice Age and the animals within it a little differently, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the strange, hidden stories of the natural world, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.